Okay, so paper sculpture, you can use any kind of paper that you want. You can use construction paper, you can use notebook paper, you can use sketchbook paper, you can use newspaper. I mean, anything that you can put your hands on, you can use to create paper sculpture. So within this sculpture, what I'd really like for you to do is one of the criteria is to have it show movement. So movement is one of those principles of design that we studied in the beginning of the school year. Um, and movement in sculpture is a relatively easy task because generally you can create a sculpture that looks like it's either moving in a direction or pointing in a direction or kind of leaning in a direction that would cause it to show movement. So using paper as a material, you can do a ton of different things. The one thing that I want you to think of is that you would possibly using paper to make components, so individual pieces that would come together to create your whole sculpture. So your paper can be folded, and if you look at this, this paper's been folded in a way that shows that there's these different planes of the paper, and these are going up, these are going back, and then these are coming up. So there's like a wave happening here with the paper, and then all of these kind of accordion type um, folded pieces. How it's folded shows movement as well. And then here's some more examples. Um, Here's folded paper that's put together, and it's a little clever, right? It starts here on the bottom with just a piece of paper, and then the folds are made, and as it progresses forward, it's turning into a paper airplane. So these are kind of all glued together as support for this final little paper airplane that's up here. Um, so this one is folded similar to the one that you saw previously. The paper's just folded in different directions. You've got these little zigzag or waves that are happening on the outside of these shapes that were created from folding the paper. You can roll paper into components. So you can simply take some paper, cut it into a square or a rectangle. You can draw on it as these are, and you can roll it up, glue it together, and then use those as components, basically sticks, to build a sculpture. If anyone was in my Intro to Art class, this is a project that we do in Intro to Art when we get to the sculpture section of the class. So this one over here is rolled up pieces of magazine. So the magazines are definitely use a lot of color, and that's where the color of this particular piece kind of comes in. So this is multiple pieces of rolled up paper that are constructed together. It seems like there might be a core here where they're put into, or somehow they're united. Like if this is like made like almost like a wreath, and then another one on top of it. And then here's some more examples of that. So these obviously had been drawn on with a black marker, rolled up, and then used to construct this um, little structure. And then this one, the same thing, very thin pieces of paper that are rolled up and then held together by some like circular form, whether it be paper. I don't think it's wire, but this one is suspended. So this hangs from like the ceiling, and so you don't have to worry about it sitting on anything. I'll get to that in a second. So paper can be crumbled up, and I want you to look at this as if you if you're using crumpled paper, you're going to use multiple pieces of crumpled paper. I do not want to see a crumpled piece of paper, and that's your sculpture. Okay, so this is just a way of creating texture within the paper. You could tear it, you can crumble it. And then you can create something like this. Now, does this sculpture have movement? So to me, this sculpture doesn't really have movement. It's more about shape and about texture than it is about movement. This one over here to me looks like maybe a bird or a bug, kind of like a bug, you know, crumpled up piece of body here, and then these are the wings. So this would have implied movement. You can also curl up paper. You could take a pencil or your finger. You can curl strips of paper around it to give it some shape. Here you've got these flower-looking things that have the curled paper that are supported by the stem. Here you have just strips of paper that are glued to this foundation. If you can see it under here, there's a little square right here. I believe that it would go all the way around in the bottom, and then these pieces come out of that. So it's got this square foundation that supports all these kind of looped pieces. And this one would be kind of like a relief because it would be flat on one side and you would curl and make all these different components with the curled paper to create this form. Then you have cut paper. So when you're cutting out paper, I would highly suggest if we were doing this in school, I would give you all X-Acto knives. X-Acto knives are short, sharp little blades that can cut paper pretty easily. It would be very difficult to cut paper without it, especially in these particular projects. This one here, these pyramid looking things, you can see how it's got this big, thicker edges. That would help to glue these all together, and then the interiors are cut out. So you have to think about your structure when you're creating sculpture. This would be more, the fish would be more like a relief. So this would be kind of either you're looking down at it or it's hanging on a wall, and these fish seem to be kind of going down into this blue area. And then, you know, the water kind of is cut out. There seems to be two layers of blue. There's this blue here on the top and then the darker blue on the bottom, and then two layers of fish. Here's one layer of fish, and then here's the second layer. This is more cut paper. You know, this looks like a wing, you know, found wing, where it was kind of folded a little bit to create these, like almost like a spine, and then the feathers would have been cut from that. And this is kind of abstractly cut. The biggest thing with this is these little holes that are cut in the paper that make it kind of visually interesting. And the other thing about this one is you don't have to worry about gravity because it is hanging by a string. So therefore, you don't have to worry that this part of the sculpture is supporting the weight of this part. So there's different ways of going about formulating your components for your paper. You can, like, this is called curtains, so it's like kind of folding it like a fan. You can roll springs, you can fold it, you can fringe it, feather, rolling it into tubes and making chains, making spirals. You can tear it. There's tons of different ways to go about doing that, and tomorrow that's what we'll be doing, is looking at different ways to construct your sculpture. So here, I want you to watch this. This is just a little video of different sculptural ways. Paper, and I'll be showing you a few techniques for 3D sculpture. All you need is paper, some scissors, and some glue. Let's get started. So this is going to show you lots of techniques of doing paper. Phew. Phew. Okay, so that gives you bunches of different um, ideas for your paper sculpture. So I want to just go back a little bit, talk a little bit about things. All right, so here I talked a little bit about how this is growing up. I'm not 100% sure what structure is holding this together. I don't know if there is like a little wire embedded into the paper that will hold it up, but as paper, it might be difficult to create this. So you have to have a little bit of patience, especially if you're doing something like this. When you start to glue your pieces together, you have to start at the bottom. Tomorrow we'll talk a little bit about foundation so that when you're building your sculpture, it'll be able to stand up. So another thing that I want besides movement, I would love to see these sculptures at least 12 inches tall or possibly 12 inches wide. If you're doing something that's like a relief, like those fish or the hand, you can just make it big, I guess, is really what I'm hoping for. Um, so I wanted to also talk about something like this, where you would have multiple things coming together to create a form. Again, you want to start kind of patiently gluing things together. In this particular piece, it looks like it's rather large, and it maybe there's an interior form that these are either glued to or started the structure, or it's all these pieces of paper and it starts small and it's like a snowball, right? It just gets bigger and bigger. Um, these I talked about these thicker areas that would be the foundation for these pieces. Um, so they would hold all this delicately cut paper together, these thicker pieces. It would also allow you to glue these pieces of paper together to create these forms. So the other thing is, if you want to, don't hesitate to think about something that's hanging. You don't necessarily have to think a lot about gravity when things are hanging, because the hanging takes care of the gravity. Um, like when I'm thinking about my work, in my head, there's no gravity. And then when I start building it, I realize that I've got maybe to make adjustments in order for it to stand. So I kind of refer to that as architecture. So I'm making the architecture of your piece correct and giving it a good foundation to stand on. So that being said, what I want you to think about today is kind of what technique do you think you could use or want to use to create your sculpture? And you can mix and match. So if you have a couple of different things that you want to put together, that's fine. Or if you want to stick with one specific way of making components like this rolled up pieces of paper, you can go with that. So I wanted to show you one last thing before I stop talking about this. And so here is an example. I'll show you this of one of those rolled up pieces of paper sculpture that I used as an example in the past. So I did draw on the paper a little bit. Um, It's got a lot of just same kind of lines, not a lot of thickness of line or anything, so I would change that up if I wanted to. And it has a little bit of movement. It's hard to see it. Can't really see it too well altogether. I don't have enough space to show you. Here we go. So it's got a little movement going up this way to its tallest part. I do have another part to kind of put together, figure out where that might go. So I have these kind of glued together. So, but I wanted to point out the bottom, it's got this little quadruped type formation down here that is supporting the rest of it. And it's also glued down to a piece of foam core. So those are things that you have to consider when you are constructing your piece. And like I said, tomorrow we'll talk a lot more about how to go about constructing and getting ideas. I don't think that you can do sketches for this because I think this is one of those projects where you start to, you pick a component, you start to make them, and then you start to build, and then like one begets the other. You would start laying down pieces, and then you're figuring out as you go what's going to happen to the next pieces. So I won't be requiring sketches, but what I am going to ask is a little 5-point response to what kind of components, or what component do you want, or are you going to use multiple, that kind of stuff. So remember, you can use any paper that you can put your hands on. You may need scissors. A glue stick would be good, and also like regular glue. So I'm hoping, you can use hot glue if you have that, Elmer's glue if you have that. I'm hoping you have some left over from paper mache that we did. So you guys should be good with materials in this particular project. So does anybody have any questions? No? All right, I'm going to stop this recording.